What should you be eating to reduce your PMS? Is there certain foods that can really help to just reduce all of those premenstrual symptoms? And how can you feel a whole lot better just by switching up a couple of things that you eat and do in your luteal phase? Let's find out. So let's talk PMS. Yes, I am walking on my walking pad. I love my walking treadmill underneath my standing desk. This is my little office space. I do have a slightly dead plant in the background that I'm desperately trying to resurrect. But if you ever come and work with me and book your root session, which I highly recommend you do, then this is my little online clinic. But anyway, we're talking about PMS and what to eat and what you can do to really support yourself in that luteal phase. So I'm going to be showing you a day of what I was eating in my specific luteal phase. Again, this is going to be unique to me because one of the key takeaways I want you to get from this video is that you need to understand your cycle, your patterns and your rhythms, and take note, become aware of what your cycle feels like for you, what the luteal phase feels like for you. I've had this dialed in now for many, many years, from having awful periods back in my 20s that were irregular. Some days I had like cycles that were like 18 days long and it just felt like I was constantly bleeding. It was painful. I remember once being at a wedding, wasn't expecting my period, suddenly got my period, and then I ended up in like the baby feeding room, lying on the floor in the dark, waiting for somebody to like drive across the countryside to find me some drugs because I could not function without my various drugs to help me get through. And then in the last 10 years, my periods have been pain-free, PMS has been totally manageable, and everything, to be honest about my cycle, is just really boring, which is great. I mean, that has become less so as I'm now entering into that perimenopause, but I'll talk more about that in a video. And a lot of the stuff that I'll be talking about today obviously still applies even if you're in that luteal phase, but very much in your perimenopause stage of life. All of this stuff is going to be super, super supportive. But before we dive in, and before I run out of breath, so I'm now sitting down. Before we dive into some of the things that can be really helpful for supporting your PMS, let's just do a quick deep dive into what I'm talking about when I'm talking about the luteal phase and talking about PMS and all that. So let's just have a bit of a recap. So your cycle is basically made up of 4 phases. You have your menstrual phase. Day 1 of your cycle is when you stop bleeding. That's your menstrual phase. Then you have your follicular phase. This is when the body is like preparing the egg and it's like maturing. It's getting ready to be released. You have ovulation. That's when the mature egg is ready. That's when you're fertile, all of those things. And then you move into luteal phase. The body goes, oh, we're not pregnant. Okay, cool. All this uterine lining that we've been building up in those earlier phases to create a really nice home for a potential embryo is not needed. Okay, so we need to shed this lining. We need to signal to the brain and to the womb to release this lining, and let's start again. Let's try and get pregnant again next month. Your whole cycle is predicated around you being fertile, you getting pregnant. Obviously, you have a choice about whether you want to have a baby or not, but a female body is its healthiest when it is fertile. So it's really helpful. That's what the body is always sort of focusing on. So it's really important. And in your luteal phase is one of the luteal phase and the menstrual phase is often where people have the most problems, the most issues. And so in your luteal phase, the common symptoms are really low mood. So PMS, anxiety, waking up feeling awful, more panic, more depression. Also when sleep might be difficult, you might really struggle to get a good night's sleep. This is also when you might get really sore boobs, when it can be incredibly painful. There might be other issues around pain as well. And this luteal phase is really when, if we think about ovulation, and just for simplicity's sake, we think of ovulation, we think of estrogen is the star of the show when it comes to ovulation. It has its moment then. And then luteal phase, it's really progesterone that's being the star of the show. That's when it's having its moment, because you're in ovulation, you have this spike of estrogen, and then actually it drops. Estrogen drops quite low and it will slowly ramp up again in the luteal phase, but it's not the main player going on, even though it's important. So you have ovulation, nice spike, then a big drop, which is actually, side note, that can also be when you feel really awful, this transition phase between ovulation and luteal phase. That's, for me, that is probably the time that I need most support, because you have this high, then you have this drop, and you're like, oh my goodness. But then in the luteal phase, your progesterone levels should slowly increase and peak, and your estrogen levels are kind of doing a lesser peak. So that's sort of the kind of phase we get. Luteal is all about this rising progesterone, which is really important for also if you were to conceive a baby. That rise in progesterone is really going to help with the implantation of that embryo in your womb lining. But obviously over time, the brain, the body, the womb signals, no baby here, and that's when you'll suddenly get your drop of hormones to kind of release all of that uterine lining, the blood that happens in the menstrual phase, and then the whole cycle starts again. So if you're struggling with all PMS and symptoms in your in that luteal phase, most of the time, not always, because everybody's body is different, and you've really got to discover your unique root causes here, because when it comes to hormones, there's a lot of hormones at play. There's a lot of complex situations that can happen. There's estrogen, there's progesterone, there's luteinizing hormone, there's testosterone, there's follicular stimulating hormone, there's insulin that impacts it, there's cortisol that impacts it, there's structural inflammation, adenomyosis, endometriosis, fibroids, gut health impact. There can be a lot going on, which is why it's really important to understand your unique root cause, which is why I do my root sessions. But overall, if you're struggling at this week, 7 to 10 days, 7 to 14 days before you start bleeding, chances are it's likely that's to do with progesterone. And so understanding how we can really support progesterone can be super, super useful. But before we do that, I'm going to dive in, show you what I'm eating in a day when I'm in my luteal phase. And then we're going to come back and look at what are some of the things that you can really do just help bolster and support your progesterone level. So we are starting the day with some cacao. I've also had some ginger tea and some lukewarm water with some chlorophyll and lemon added to it. I don't have cacao every morning, but in my luteal phase, I often do crave chocolate. And cacao is a great source of antioxidants. It's got a bit of fiber, it's got healthy fats. I also added some protein to this, some shashandra powder, some sea salt. So it's a really great way of stabilizing my insulin management in the morning. And I'll share a little bit more about that later on in the video about why that's important, especially in your luteal phase. Then I just take a bit of time. This looks different every morning depending on when I wake up and what time it is, but just some time to really regulate my nervous system, to breathe. I lit some herbs, some sal planto, I don't know how you pronounce that. Anyway, in the morning, and just took some time to really breathe in, regulate my nervous system. I did a little tiny bit of yoga this morning, but especially in my luteal phase, I can wake up really anxious because of where my hormones are at sometimes. And so it's just a really good way to make sure that things regulate and calm down. Then in this particular morning, I had a ginger shot, which is always fun. I love ginger. It's so anti-inflammatory. It's a really, really kind of potent food, herb, root vegetable, whatever you want to call it, to use. I love ginger for so many things. It's great for your gut health. It's great for hormones. It's great for your immunity. It's just fabulous. Then I wasn't really sure what to have for breakfast, to be honest. I'd had my cacao, so I wasn't super hungry. I'd had some of this fresh bread. So I just had some homemade gluten-free bread, and then I did some almond butter on it, and then some of this kind of flat peach, which is actually such a delicious breakfast. So there's probably less protein than I would normally eat, especially during my luteal phase, but I did know I was heading to the gym later. So if I know I'm going to head to the gym and I'm going to do a bit of a heavier workout, I tend to have a more carb-heavy breakfast, but I also did get probably about 20 grams of protein in that cacao this morning. So I have been kind of hitting those protein goals, but this was a super delicious breakfast. And I also made a coffee to go with it as well, which I just love coffee. I think coffee isn't always the most supportive thing of your overall cycle, so it's definitely something to test. but I can, if I've had food, my main rule for clients is food before coffee. Always, always, always. Never coffee on an empty stomach. That can be really disruptive of your insulin management and your gut health and bloating and these kind of things. If I have one coffee a day during my luteal phase with food, I'm totally fine with that. But I also have done a lot of gut healing work and a lot of hormone balancing support. So if I have this with food, it's not super disruptive. So got a bit of a coffee going on there. And I think that coffee was also primarily decaf. I think I had decaf beans in the machine. And I had that with my yummy toast. And this just felt like such a delightful breakfast. Then this is a bit of tidy up time and also just some of the supplements I'm taking. I've got some fish oil in here. I've got my multivitamin. I think already this morning I've taken a couple of other supplements, things like vitamin C, Angus castus, those kind of things that I take on a daily basis, along with St. John's wort, that I all find really supportive. Over the last 7 years, as you can imagine, I've experimented a lot with supplements, and the supplements I take now are actually all the ones generally that I notice a big difference with. I think because of my genetic setup, because of living with complex PTSD and neurodivergence, I probably am the person that does need or take more supplements than others might need. But again, through experimentation, I have found that the supplements I take are the supplements that make a difference for me and my life and everything that's going on just now. Then it's time to work. So I'm planning on going to the gym later. As you can see, I've got a bit of a cold brew coffee here. I think this got delivered to me from the person of my dreams, aka husband. So I'm on my working treadmill, on my desk, and I'm just working, just getting stuff done. It looks like I'm concentrating, but that is basically my morning. And then I have a banana, and then I'm headed to the gym. And you are lucky that you have this footage. I feel so awkward, and I hate taking footage when I'm working out in the gym. I just feel slightly awkward about it. I'm scared about getting other people in the shot who haven't consented to being on video. Plus, I'm hot and I'm sweaty, but I managed to record this discreetly. So I had a really good workout session here. I was doing a bunch of weighted squats on the squat rack thing, and then doing some tricep push-ups, which I'm really trying to work on to help with my yoga. And then by the time I finish this workout, I am so hungry. I feel like I could literally eat anything, which is a sign that I did a good workout. And we are due a shop, so we didn't have much food in the house. So I actually went by the shop on the way home, and I got some venison burgers. Luteal phase for me, I often do crave more red meats, which makes sense because I'm about to bleed out a whole bunch of blood. So I go with it. So I made some really nice venison burgers. I got some gluten-free rolls, which I don't often do, but I just want, to be honest, I fancied a burger. I have some homemade mayonnaise here, so I've got some healthy fats. I'm doing some salad with it. This was such a great luteal phase lunch. Really high in protein, healthy fats, fiber, delicious, felt like a total treat. It was a winner. So I think a lot of people would be surprised as a holistic nutritionist for me to say that burgers are probably one of my favorite meals. If you agree, leave me a burger emoji in the comments and we can be Team Burger. Then it was time for some dark chocolate, rooibos tea and goat's milk, and I shared the final cookie with my husband. Oh, plus some fizzy water, more work this afternoon. Then dinner was more burgers. This wasn't actually meant to be the plan. It's a bit of a burger heavy day, but I do love a burger. This is turkey and courgette homemade burgers with some incredible coleslaw with beetroot in, which is so good for your liver and for your hormones, and some homemade wedges that actually turned out brilliantly. Look at these. And then I was a little bit hungry after that still, so I had some linseeds to help my hormones, some yogurt and some jam. And then by that point, to be honest, I was totally full, but I really fancied something sweet. So I found some leftover chocolate from Easter, some Ombar, which is like the best kind of milk chocolate. And I had a couple of squares of that. I wasn't particularly hungry, but I really fancied it with a cup of tea. So I just went for it because I feel like that's luteal phase for you, isn't it? So when it comes to supporting progesterone, there's a lot you can do. We have this cultural narrative that having awful periods is air quotes normal. It's just our cross to bear as women. And I honestly think BS to that. Yes, it's really common for women to have awful periods, but it is not normal. If you are struggling with consistent cyclical symptoms, your body is desperately trying to communicate something with you. It's trying to tell you that it needs something. And through nutrition and lifestyle choices and supplementation, you can make so much progress. I have really boring periods now. I have helped so many clients go from awful cycles and periods to very boring, very regular. Struggling with your cycle is not just another cross to bear as a female. It's a sign that there's inflammation and imbalance happening in your body, and you are the one with the power and the choice to do something about it. Nobody is going to come along and sort out your hormones for you. No medication you can take is actually going to fix them and support them. They're just going to mask and hide the problem at bay. And at some point, you're going to have to face it. And what often happens a lot of the time is women ignore hormone imbalance. And then when they hit that sort of menopause time, perimenopause, that's when it all comes to light and crap really hits the fan there. And I don't want that for you, especially when some of this stuff is not super complicated or that hard. So let's look at progesterone. First of all, let's do a little bit of a biology lesson. Progesterone is a hormone. The body needs to make it. So the first question is, how does your body make progesterone? Well, let's just say it has a little bucket, a metaphorical bucket that it needs, that it will draw on of the ingredients to make progesterone. However, the body is making lots of hormones all at once, not just sex hormones, lots of hormones that all also come from this bucket, this resource, and especially cortisol. So this more stress hormone. So if you are in a state of chronic stress, your body is going to prioritize using this limited resource to make cortisol primarily, because whilst your body wants you to be fertile, it primarily wants you to be alive. And if your brain senses consistent threat, whether the threat is real, whether it is perceived, aka made up, just you overthinking, just you creating panic in your mind, it is going to respond in a way to protect you. It's going to produce cortisol. I'm just putting this all in as simplistic, metaphorical way as possible, but it can be really helpful. So if and as you get older, your progesterone levels are going to lower slowly over time anyway. So if you continue to age, which we all inevitably do, and you add more stress and you live in a state of chronic stress, you are not going to be making an abundance of progesterone because your body is going to prioritize your survival over your fertility every time. And so it's going to be really important, first of all, to support your progesterone levels. We need to look at what are the data inputs going into your brain and how much are you signaling safety to the brain versus threat to the brain. Now, this is a big topic I'm sure I'll talk more about, but it's often something we dismiss and overlook because we're like, oh, stress, whatever, I don't feel stressed. It's not actually about whether you feel stressed. Is your body telling you you are stressed and how much data of safety is going into your brain. So what are some of the ways that you signal safety to the brain? Number one is eating nourishing, adequate foods. Really important, especially in your luteal phase. Your metabolic rate goes up. You do need more calories, more nourishment, but overall as a female, if you are under eating, it's going to stress the body out, especially if you're under eating and over exercising. If you're an active female, meaning you go into the gym, you're doing stuff on most days, you need to make sure you're really nourishing. So food is one of the easiest and most strategic ways to signal safety to the brain. Next thing is sleep. Good quality and quantity of sleep, again, is such a good way to say to the brain, hey, we're okay, we're safe, it's okay, there's no bears. That's when your body does so much healing and repair. Your hormones love quality and quantity of sleeps. And because it's another, if we put it simply, signal of safety to the brain. Other things that you can do to signal safety to the brain, these are things that ideally, especially if you're struggling with PMS, that you start to practice on a regular basis, are things like mindfulness activities, yoga, meditation, Tai Chi, mindful walking, slowing down. I always encourage my clients to begin and find a form of meditation, whether it's yoga nidra, whether it's body scans, whether it's transcendental meditation, whatever you're into. We need to daily put signals of safety into the brain and interrupt that survival cycle so that your brain and your womb, your brain and your ovaries can have an uninterrupted connection. This is a more metaphorical way of thinking about it, but I find it really helpful. Your brain is the one that's signaling to your womb to make these hormones, to make this progesterone. But if it's constantly being interrupted by this survival request, no, threat, this communication is going to constantly be interrupted, impaired. So what you want to do is create regular data inputs so that the communication between your womb and your brain can kind of go uninterrupted and be really smooth. The more inputs of threat you have to your brain, the more your body is going to prioritize cortisol production, adrenaline production over progesterone. Because while your body wants you to be fertile, fertility is pointless if you are not surviving. And there's just a very primal part of our brain, and some of these threats, we get threats all through the day. Some of them are real, people shouting at us, snarky emails, relationship issues, children screaming at us, are all threats to the brain. But they can also be perceived threats. Me just sitting, ruminating and thinking about something awful happening, something awful that happened in the past or that might happen in the future, is also going to create that biochemical response of stress, which is why if you want to balance your hormones, you need to be intentional about signaling safety to the brain through food, through sleep, through mindfulness practices. Simple. So that's the first thing, and I could talk an awful lot about that, but for time's sake, the next thing, which is super accessible, really easy, totally love, very low cost, is vitamin C. Did you know vitamin C is one of my favorite vitamins? Did you know that someone won a Nobel Prize, Dr. Linus Pauling, for their research in vitamin C? And also, did you know that we are one of the few mammals, other than guinea pigs and another mammal that I can't remember, that neither produce nor store vitamin C? All other mammals on Earth do. We do not. So vitamin C is important for so many things, but something that a lot of people don't know about, because you often think about vitamin C with like your immune system, having a cold, those kind of things. But actually, and it is obviously supportive of that, because it really helps with something called glutathione production, which is one of the body's master antioxidants. That's true. But it also can be really helpful in progesterone production. Isn't that great news? So vitamin C, very safe. It's water soluble. But when you take it supplementally or you eat it in food, your body's only going to take what it needs and you pee out the rest. But the only way you as a human are getting vitamin C is through the food you eat. And where you get vitamin C through things like fruits and vegetables, but most people aren't eating enough of those. And even if you were to eat 50 oranges in a day, you're still going to get a low amount of vitamin C. So I personally take a high dose of vitamin C every single day. I find it really helpful for all sorts of things. And one of them is progesterone levels. So 2 different things. The overarching thing is you want to make sure you nourish your body with all the right nutrients and vitamins that it needs to help with this progesterone production. And that's where vitamin C can come into play. Also, like I've talked about in other videos, making sure you're eating adequate protein to really help with that insulin sensitivity. Because I forgot to say, during your luteal phase, because your estrogen levels lower slightly, you do become, it does impact your insulin sensitivity. So that's why you would crave more sugar, more cakes, more crisps, or these kind of things. So in your luteal phase, you really want to prioritize that protein and healthy fats for breakfast. Like, that is something you really want to focus on during that phase. That's why this morning you can see I had the cacao, which has some fiber, it has lots of healthy fats. I added protein to it so that the first thing in the morning, I'm getting healthy fats and protein and some nice antioxidants and polyphenols. It's first thing in the morning because I'm in that luteal phase and I want to balance out my estrogen the rest of the day. So it's really normal to crave more unhealthy food during your luteal phase. So it's really important to prioritize good nourishment and making sure you're getting a lot of healthy fat, unprocessed whole food fats, nuts, seeds, dark chocolate, these kind of things, and also making sure you really prioritize protein for breakfast in your luteal phase. So we've actually talked about 3 things. Signaling safety to the brain, really important, through your sleep, through your nourishment, through mindfulness practices, really important. Vitamin C, we're one of the few mammals that neither make nor store it, and it can impact your progesterone production. Number 3, making sure you really support your insulin management with healthy fats and healthy proteins, especially at breakfast. Breakfast time, morning time can be really, really important for just helping you manage your cravings the rest of the day. So those are some of my 3 kind of foundational things. But remember, Everybody is different. And if you're really struggling with your hormones, you need to find out why. You know, I run hormone panels with clients. I'll go through lab tests with them. We'll do genetic testing with them. And every client I have, even if they have similar symptoms, their root causes are completely different. And they've maybe spent multiple years thinking they're a little bit crazy or it's all in their head. And then when we actually uncover their root causes, they're like, oh my goodness, I can't believe this was going on the whole time. So whilst these are really useful foundations that hopefully will really serve you, if you've been struggling for a while and not making progress, it's probably because you are not clear on the problem you are solving. Said another way, how are you going to solve a problem with your health, with your symptoms, if you aren't sure what the problem is? Because you're bloating or heavy periods isn't a root cause, that's a symptom. That's not telling you why. It's just the end result of an more internal root issue. You have to uncover that root issue in order to make progress. When I did that with my health, and when I've done it with hundreds of women in my clinic, that is what really is a game changer, and that changes and it really accelerates your progress from going from really well-intentioned efforts and just trying to do stuff you've read about on Instagram or ChatGPT. That's when you shift to like, oh my goodness, I feel better. I've made more progress in the last 3 months than I have in the last 3 years. Why? Because you know what problem you're solving, and that changes everything. So if you want to come and work with me and book your root session, you can literally book it in right here, right now. Links are in the show notes below. Otherwise, thank you for joining me, and I will see you next week.